No, good. So Devin does this stuff professionally, and we are thrilled that he's able to share his expertise with us today. Apropos of that, I do want to say that while Devin does provide courses on de-escalation that result in certification and that kind of thing, this is a foreshortened program that we felt would meet the needs of us here at the Warming Place. So you're not going to leave with a certificate today. If anybody wants a certificate, time to go now. So thank you for coming. And here is Devin.
Thank you, Sue. How's this volume? Good, thank you. All right, so thanks for having me. Thank you for that great intro. I'm happy to do this. And yeah, as Sue said, I do this for a living. I am a clinical director at Victory Programs, where I support the clinical services for 6 programs. Service the counseling teams, I provide regular trainings. I provide an 8-hour de-escalation training once a month at my company, where I certify people. Some of the language in this training is from that training, which is from the company CPI. And others are from my own experience and my own analogies. In my free time, I like to do martial arts. So I might pull in some metaphors from martial arts experience as I talk about de-escalation. I do a lot of trainings. The Bureau of Substance Abuse Services has also hired me as a contract trainer for a variety of topics. Substance use, homelessness, and trauma are the main areas of my expertise, but de-escalation is a particular area of interest and expertise for me. Let's talk about what makes those situations potentially difficult. So here are my ideas. Some people may feel concerns around safety. That ever-present possibility, what if this becomes physical and someone assaults me, right? So people might have that in the back of their mind. People may feel themselves like, I'm in over my head, I don't feel competent or comfortable. Something that comes up in the workspaces I'm in a lot is wanting to be fair. This may not come up here a lot, but in recovery residential programs, we redirect clients, and the first thing that they might say to us is like, why are you talking to me? You didn't talk to that person, Maybe not feeling like we relate. A lot of people in this room might be more privileged than some of the people who are coming in here, and so we might feel like, we're asking too much and maybe like it's not fair. Fear of doing a bad job or looking bad. And that happens a lot at my job with staff because there's the element of, there's like supervisors there's higher ups, and you don't want to de-escalate or redirect badly and then look bad. And this is a big one, I think. A personal history of difficult conversations not going well. So some people have had the experience of trying to grapple with difficult situations in the past, and it didn't go well. So it's kind of like, that kind of makes you not want to do it again. And this is not something that's usually brought up, but I think is in the background for a lot of people. A developmental history of difficult conversations being scary or upsetting. So if people grew up in a home, if they were in a place where they came from, where if a difficult conversation needed to happen, it was a big, explosive event, that is scary and upsetting and makes you want to avoid difficult conversations in general. And then there's, also what Julie was speaking to, and Sue, about not knowing how to set limits, right? Like, someone comes in, we've got to redirect them, and how do I do that? Is there a proper way to do that? Everything that we're going to talk about is going to go better with something called rapport. So if I have good rapport with you, it means we get along well, right? We have a good relationship. And so I've talked to a number of counselors or direct care staff who've done de-escalations, and they talk about their approach, and I can tell you their approach is sometimes good and sometimes terrible, but the way it unfolds is directly related to the relationship they have with the person. So you could do something like, I told this person to get out of my effing face, right? And that could go well or go really badly, but it's not like, oh, that worked, so that's a good technique. It might be that worked because of the specific relationship you have with the person you told that to, or how that person responds to that kind of aggression. So there's a shorter range of possibility, right? I've seen people do things that I wouldn't do, but they worked very well, right? And I've seen people do approaches I recommended, and they did not go well at all, right? And what's that magic ingredient? It's the relationship you have with someone. So I could be the best de-escalator in the world, but if I walk into a new situation and I have no relationship with someone and they're already escalated, that's a tough ask, right? They're like, what can I do? I used to work for 3 years in a very violent psych hospital called Arbor Hospital, and chronically understaffed, very violent. And I was like the go-to de-escalator. I would run, they would say on the intercom, code green on South 2. And then all the people who would respond to violent situations, like myself, we'd all run down to South 2. And I was really good at it. I'd get there, I'd talk someone down as best I could, and build a relationship with them. But I remember one time I ran to the code, I got there, and just as I came around the corner, so I ran right into someone's fist and got a concussion and went to the hospital. And so, you know, if I were to autopsy that situation, I couldn't say, what de-escalation skills should I have done? Because sometimes you just run right into a fist and there's nothing you can do, right? So when we talk about de-escalation, it's always within reason. When we come into an already escalated situation, that's tough. The good news is that rapport is easily accessible. You don't need like years of experience to build it with someone. When I was working in the psych hospital, one thing I learned, I worked there weekends while I was in grad school, and I would do very intensive weekends. I would work 16 hours and 16 hours, Saturday and Sunday. And it's a fast-moving crowd over there, so sometimes I'd be there one weekend, and most of the unit would turn over in that week, and it'd be all new people. And so I had to quickly build relationships with a lot of different people. And so the first thing I started doing at the start of my shift is walking around and saying, hey, my name is Devin, what's your name? And most of the time people would, you know, be sheepish in the morning, and they'd be like, ugh, you know, they'd give me a little bit. Very rarely, someone would be like, F off, right then and there. Even that was useful though, because that's a temperature check. It's like, oh, okay, that person is not feeling it, right? If I at least do a nice, how you doing, what's your name, then when that person is escalated 8 hours later, and they're shouting, and they're not really responding to a lot of people, I at least have a name, and I can say, hey, Henry, what's going on? You know, that is rapport. I built it 8 hours ago, and it was just by getting someone's first name. So rapport is everything. Rapport is your relationship. But the good news is you don't need a lot of time to build rapport. Someone can walk into the warming center and you say, hi, my name is Devin, what's yours? I'm happy to have you here, what's going on? And you've already built rapport. So it's that easy to start rapport. Of course, there's degrees. You can do more than that. You can talk about the game or, you know, find some common interest. But the start of rapport is instantly accessible if you approach someone and you say, my name is X, what's your name? How are you doing today? So that's the first skill of de-escalation. I know that's a little anticlimactic because it's kind of easy. But if you do that with everyone who walks in the door, you've established rapport with everyone who walks through the door. Some people might walk through the door already escalated, and that's a tough ask. But get their name, how you doing? Need to engage. Because we're all aware of the worst case scenarios that we've already discussed, we might understandably be reluctant to dive into difficult situations. That means a very rational response for humans like us is to avoid engaging in a possible stressful or difficult intervention. So if you already know, like, oh, I've seen some situations go badly, I've seen someone be very escalated, it's like probably the smart thing is I get away from this possibility. There's a catch-22 here. The more we avoid or delay difficult possible situations, the more difficult these interactions can become. I know personally, I don't know if anyone can relate to this, I know personally a number of people I've met in my life who say that they hate confrontation, and they are some of the most confrontational people I've ever met. And I think that what's going on for them is that they're avoiding the small, minuscule confrontations, and then we can't avoid them forever. You know, eventually they build up all this stress and anger with whatever it is that's going on, and then they have to have that difficult, firm conversation when it's already a level 10, as opposed to when it's a level 1. So I'm going to use my first martial arts metaphor here. We're going to focus on setting ourselves up for success, and I'm a big fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And one thing that my old sensei used to say to me a lot, which pissed me off, and it pissed everyone else off, was when you're learning jiu-jitsu, you learn moves and you learn counter moves, right? And one move that we all hate being in is called a triangle choke. And this is really bad to be in, because if someone's choking you in a triangle choke, they're choking you with their legs, and most people know that legs are stronger than arms. So if someone is choking me with their legs and they're already in position, I've got just my arms against their really strong legs. And so a lot of times, newer people get stuck in a lot of triangle chokes. We're struggling to get out, and we say to our coach or our sensei, hey, how do I counter a triangle choke? How do I get out of there? And does anyone have any guesses on the annoying response that someone might give, like a coach, of how you get out of a triangle choke? Don't get into one in the first place. And I hate that. And I hated that back then. I wanted to learn, like, what's the cool counter move? How do I get out of this? Now that I've been doing it for 8 years, you know, and I've progressed through belts and I have a lot of fighting experience, now I tell that to other people. Don't get into one. Because now I know the counters, and they hurt my ears. Like getting someone's legs off of me, it's like a lot of damage to get out of a triangle choke. And now I say, you know what, I'd really rather not get into one in the first place. And so maybe you're picking up on the analogy here, but just to make it explicit, difficult situations are the triangle choke. When situations are as bad as possible, that is when, you know, it's like, how do I get out of this situation? And the bad news is when it's a bad situation, your choices are limited. You do not have as many options. We will talk about the analogy of how you get out of a triangle choke, not literally, but a bad situation. But most of this work is not getting into that situation in the first place. Now, of course, it's oftentimes unavoidable. Just like if I'm running around a corner, someone punches me in the face as I turn the corner, I couldn't know that would happen. That's kind of like a situation I was thrown into. But we can't plan our lives around unpredictability. We have to plan our lives around how can we avoid those situations to the best of our ability. I like the phrase that is incorrectly translated from Mandarin, that crisis is a dangerous opportunity, right? When there's a crisis, there is opportunity and there is danger. But I would rather strike when the iron is cold, which in this context means I want to deal with a situation when it's not a situation, right? So here's 4 examples from my workplace. Clients might be suicidal, right? And I may be working with a client for months, and then a client says to me, I want to kill myself. I have a plan. I have a plan. That plan is to take my medication. I've been hoarding that medication, and I'm going to do it. That's a triangle choke. What I train my counselors is, like, because most counselors are scared of suicide talks, they don't have suicide talks until someone is at the edge of a cliff, right? And I train my counselors, bring up suicide every single day. And I phrase it like this. I say to my clients, so how are your suicidal thoughts treating you? And they might say to me, Devin, I'm not having suicidal thinking. This is important. I don't say good. I say, okay. And I normalize it. I'm normalizing it with the question. That's why I ask it so often. And I also am not saying good, because I want to also educate them. You know, over 80% of the clients we serve have suicidal thinking, and that's why I keep asking about it, because it's very common. Suicidal thinking is not the same thing as having intent, it's not the same thing as having a plan, and it's not the same thing as having access to a plan. All of those things represent high acuity and danger. But, you know, I serve miserable people who are homeless and unhoused, and they've got mental illness and they're in recovery. And a lot of them wake up unhappy and think things like, I wish I was never born, right? That's a suicidal thought. And it doesn't necessarily mean I want to kill myself. But if I am not able to build a relationship with them and have a talk with them about that, then I'm only going to talk about it when they're desperate for help enough that they're on the cliff's edge and they're like, I have a plan, I have access to my plan, and I'm going to go, right? And just like my mom said, that's like an opportunity. They're doing that because they want me to stop them. But I would rather talk someone down from like waking up and having that kind of passive thought, I wish I was never born, than someone who is like right at cliff's edge, and if I handle this incorrectly, a lot could go wrong, right? I also do this with substance use. I train counselors. We serve people in recovery, and so I say to them, how is your substances treating you? And a lot of clients know that we have a sober rule, meaning like you can't use substances. We don't kick people out for relapse. Relapse is part of recovery, but they're ashamed of their substance use, so a lot of them hide that they're actively using or they relapsed. And so I do it the same. I say, so how's your substance use treating you? What substances are you using? And they say, Devin, I'm sober. And I don't say good. I say, okay. I just assumed that maybe you were using, because I assume everyone here is using, because this is early recovery. But you're sober. And I do that because a lot of times people in my job don't ask about substance use until we have a reason to suspect that they're using. Right? Like they're off baseline, they're acting weird, they smell like alcohol, and then, or like their roommate reported, like my roommate was smoking crack or something. And then we try and have a conversation with them about their substance use, and they're immediately paranoid. They're like, why are you asking? You know? And sometimes the counselors feel the pressure and they respond, well, someone told me. And they're like, well, they were lying and here's why. And we get kind of way off base. You know, I wanted to talk to them about them and their problems, but now I'm kind of justifying my question. So I ask the question every week. And then, you know, if there's a reason to suspect that they're actually using, I've already normalized it. I've already set the expectation. I always ask this question. I always assume people are struggling with their use because that's the context of this program. So if they're like, why are you asking me? That's my response. It's like I asked you last week. I asked you the week before. I always ask people. This is a recovery program. This is also good with anger issues. If you know your clients or you know the people you serve and someone has anger issues, I like to strike when the iron is cold. They're like zippity-doo-dah, whistle blowing. It's like, that's when I want to talk to them about their anger issue. I'm like, hey, 2 weeks ago, you were in the warming center, and I noticed you got agitated real fast. Could I talk to you about that quick? Right? That's a lot easier of a conversation than waiting for that person to blow up again, right? And chew someone's head off. Conflict possibilities you know about. So, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name when I asked the question, but you spoke about two people fighting in the warming center, right? So, nothing we can do if we didn't see that coming. But if we do see it coming, we should do something about it, right? If we see two people walking in who have issues with each other, or we see one of them walk in first, and we know that there's a conflict possibility, it's going to be a lot more helpful if we could pull one aside and we could say, hey, you know, the other day I saw you kind of getting into issues with your peer while you were here. I imagine they'll probably make a comment under their breath again like they did before. How do you think you could respond to that in a way that's appropriate? You know? And so I'm having that conversation before it's an issue. That's the ideal, right? If I know it's possible, I'd rather talk about it when it's not an issue, because if those two people start yelling at each other and they're not listening to us talking to them, it's going to not be as effective. So whenever possible, I would like to avoid a triangle choke. I want to talk first about baselines. A baseline is just like you get to know someone and you get a sense of like, oh, that's them, right? That's not destiny, people can change, right? But how many of us have had the experience of knowing someone well, and then they're acting off, and we're kind of like, oh, something's off with that person, right? So that's a basic skill that we have socially with each other. Do we have a sense of what our own baselines look like? So just like people in your family, in your life, hopefully you can tell, like, oh, something's off with them. They're in a bad mood or something like that. But it's also a skill to know your own baseline. Like, maybe you notice in the morning you're snapping at a couple people, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not myself. Something's going on. Maybe I haven't examined how I'm doing. So it's important to know other people's baseline and our own baseline as the first thing we want to notice. And so if we're talking about this context of people we serve coming into the warming center, if we see them 2-3 times, we should get a good instinct of what their baseline is. Like, okay, this is kind of how they were last time they were here. Doesn't mean they're perfect, you know? Like, doesn't mean they're not suffering from anxiety or depression or something like that. Baseline is not destiny. But it's like, oh, this is how I've come to know you, right? This is what you generally look like. So that we get a sense of, like, something's off here. We want to get a sense of that. If someone close to you is off their baseline, how do you typically respond? Meaning, you have a good sense of what they're like, and suddenly they're just not acting their normal selves. What would you respond with to someone you care deeply about?
What's the matter with you?
What's the matter with you? Maybe a little nicer. Maybe you say, how are you? Is something wrong? Something like that. What's going on? Yeah, kind of neutral but empathetic. Like, I see something's off here. Tell me what's going on. All right, let's talk about some precipitating factors, possible reasons that individuals here might escalate. So we've named some of them. Precipitating factors are both recent and persistent long-term factors that influence behavior. Here's some examples. Julie brought this up, substance use. Someone comes in here and they're on something. They are not themselves, right? Conflict with a peer is another one we've talked about. Trauma triggers, maybe like 100% of the people who are homeless are traumatized, right? And so they have a variety of traumas, and triggers, people have heard that word before, right? That's seeped into the culture. Triggers kind of time travel your nervous system. So usually people who are triggered are not literally confused about what time it is, though sometimes they are. But if you're triggered, if your trauma button has been pushed, you might go back in time, your nervous system, to when you were in deep danger. And your nervous system says, we've got to be on edge because we're in danger. So something may have set someone off before they came in here, and they may be looking around thinking, am I going to get attacked? Is something going to happen here? This is an example I like. In my programs, we connect with a dental company called Green Line Dental that serves Mass Health. And so all of our clients who are homeless have Mass Health. And while they're with us, they're able to get some pretty extensive dental work. And some homeless people have some really bad teeth problems. And something that happens if you have chronic pain is that you sometimes aren't consciously aware that you have chronic pain because you've kind of dissociated from it. So it's in the back of your mind. It's like back pain or tooth pain. And something nice I've seen is clients who have decades-long teeth problems get a nice workup, get brand new teeth sometimes for free, and they have a slight personality change for the better because they didn't even know that they were in constant pain. They just got used to it. And now their teeth are fixed, they feel better about themselves, they feel better physically. So their baseline actually changes for the better. A common thing that this population might be struggling with is lack of sleep. If you ever, when you were younger, did an all-nighter, you know that you start to get crazy on one night without sleep. You're not yourself. And then we talk a lot lately in the modern era about people with substance use may also have mental health. We now know that pretty much everyone has a mental health struggle when they're dealing with homelessness because that extreme of a situation puts you well outside of managing yourself. So we see a huge correlation with mental health struggles for the population of people who might come in here for the warming center. If we knew some of these things, how might that change our approach? So for instance, the example of chronic tooth pain. We have someone coming in here, they have a really bad tooth pain, and that makes them short-tempered, irritable. If we know that in advance, how might that change how we respond to them? And going back to that magic ingredient of rapport, maybe the reason I know about the tooth pain is because yesterday we were chatting for a while. So we have a rapport, we have a relationship. And so I see this person come in irritable, and they're kind of biting the heads off of other people. They're like snapping at them. And you can see from a mile away that like things are not going well. They're like kind of pissing off some other people. Maybe they're not gonna be the conflict, but maybe they'll cause another conflict because of how rude they're being. You have this magic thing of rapport, so you might say, hey, could I talk to you for a minute? Yesterday you were telling me about your chronic tooth pain, and I see you've been a little irritable with a few people. Do you think that's related? Do you need anything? Would something help? You know, do you want something warm to drink? You know, you don't have to have a perfect solution, but the very fact that I'm like making this conversation about compassion rather than like just chastising this person because they're you know, pissing off the community or something means that I'm in a better place. And hopefully I'm addressing this before they've turned it into a full-blown crisis. All right, so I mentioned before that I do an 8-hour training called CPI. A lot of programs do it, a lot of schools use it, CPI, and in other countries too. This is kind of considered the gold standard. I really like CPI, and one thing I like about it is I like the simplified language and concepts that they use. So I want to just collaboratively adjust our language together. These are words that I'm sure most, if not all of them, you all know, but I'm going to slightly tweak our definition and see what we notice about these new definitions. So first off, let's define what behavior is. All behavior is a form of communication. So whenever someone has a behavior, they're communicating something. Distress behavior communicates distress. So if someone is shouting in your face about something, they're communicating some distress. This is a big one that a lot of people I work with have trouble with how broad this definition is, but I love it. Anxiety is a change in typical behavior. That's a pretty big definition that could describe just about anything, right? So, typical behavior we could describe as what I said earlier, baseline, right? And remember when I asked, if someone was acting not themselves, how might you respond? And kind of what we talked about was like, hey, what's going on? How you doing? That might be similar to how you might respond if someone you care about was feeling anxious. We all know what anxiety generally looks like. I like this broad definition of a change in typical behavior because we should assume anxiety, even if that's not the case. So if someone is just acting not themselves, let's err on the side of they're anxious. Sticking with broad definitions that at first are going to seem a little too broad, defensive. So defensive here I'm going to define as protecting oneself from a real or perceived challenge or threat. And here's where things get interesting, because if anyone remembers the subtitle of this training, it was responding to defensive behaviors. And we are going to redefine a lot of things under that umbrella of defensiveness. And some people have heard this phrase, I'm sure, the best defense is a strong what? Offense, yes. So that's a fighting term, right? The best defense is a strong offense. And everyone knows that. And so sometimes people feel under attack from the world. And so because they're under attack from the world, they're lashing out. And we're responding to that defensively. We're like, this person is aggressive, right? What we're not necessarily seeing is this person is defensive. And so if we could shift our thinking about someone else who seems aggressive and think this person's defensive, we might approach them a little bit differently. Yeah, and this is kind of the first big skill that I want to allude to, which is we're responding to anxiety with support. And going back to this overly broad definition of anxiety, anyone could be feeling anxious, right? If it's a change in typical behavior, that could describe everyone here. That could describe anyone who walks through this door, because I don't know them, right? And so if we should generally respond to anxiety with support as you just described it, then we should always be behaving that way. Because we're going to err on the side of assuming someone is struggling with anxiety, so I'm going to err on the side of being supportive. So everyone who walks through this door should get support, because we're generally going to assume anxiety. Yeah, some people in this room may or may not have heard this, but there is an effort culturally to change some of our language. So I've used a couple words interchangeably, but like homeless people, and there's an effort to describe them as unhoused people, or people experiencing homelessness. And you could do the same thing with substance addicted people, or people who struggle with substance use. And the reason for that slight language change is we're kind of putting people in a box and getting them stuck there, right? And it's like, those are homeless people, right? As opposed to people experiencing homelessness, which could describe any one of us, right? It could describe we miss our mortgage payment a few times, and then we're displaced, and now we're people who experience homelessness. And so, we could define someone as, oh, that's an addict, right? As opposed to a person struggling with addiction. And so I oscillate between those terms for understanding purposes, but there's an effort culturally to not trap people in their definitions. And that also traps people in their shame, right? Like, I was this person of esteem, and now I'm this. I'm stuck as this. And that feels bad to me. Yeah. So just getting back to, for a moment, this idea of erring on the side of support for everyone, because we're going to assume everyone is struggling with anxiety. So that's how you respond to anxiety. Here's how you respond to distress and defensive behavior. And I know it's going to generate a response and some questions. And don't worry, I won't leave you hanging. We'll get to those after the break. So distress behavior. Distress behavior, we all know, I said earlier, communicates distress. How might that change how we respond? So if someone out in the street is shouting and they're saying profane, offensive words, and they're saying awful things, how might it change our response to interpret it as they're communicating some distress? Let's say we're a hostage negotiator, right? And someone is like being scary, holding a gun to other people, and it's our responsibility to de-escalate them. If I view it as they're the problem, I might be right, but I'm less effective, right? It's like their problem is they're putting these people's lives in danger, maybe myself in danger, and so now I'm thinking about myself and I'm thinking about those people. That's fair, I should. However, if I want to be effective at intervening, I might want to start asking the question with curiosity, what's going on with them, And so, for people who are experiencing homelessness, they, just like if you've ever tried an all-nighter or two in a row, you start to feel how way off baseline you can get really quick. And so people who are rough sleepers, it doesn't take long for them to get out of their right state of mind. It doesn't take an exceptional diagnosis to do that, right? And so sometimes people might be pacing the street, shouting things, and what's really going on is maybe they've had a really painful toothache for decades, and they have lost the ability to articulate that. And so they might be shouting about paranoia and all this other things, and really they're communicating all this discomfort and distress that's coming from them. And if we respond like how they're affecting us, like you're making me uncomfortable, please stop, there might be some effectiveness in that solution because it gives them some perspective of how their behavior affects others. But we can be even more effective if we could try and figure out what are they asking for? Are they asking for something because they're distressed? Now, a similar definition is defensive behavior, protecting oneself from real or perceived threats. And we all know that that can look like offensive behavior because the best defense is a strong offense. So this includes aggression, shouting, threatening. All of that is someone being defensive, even though that doesn't always feel the case. Our best responses to defensive behavior, this is something I anticipate could stir questions. Our best response to defensive behavior is to be directive. And I will come back to this, but I'll welcome the probable confusion that might stir for people. So earlier I said that the response to anxiety is support, and that's probably easy to understand, right? Someone is anxious, how you doing? How can we help? That makes sense. But someone is displaying defensive behavior, they're shouting, they're being threatening. How does it sound to people that I'm giving you the advice to be directive with them? So how easily this works is going to largely depend on rapport, just like everything else. So if you know someone and you've talked to them and now they're agitated and you say to them, hey, could you go to this other area? Hopefully they respond well to you because of that relationship. If I walk into the warming center, a relative stranger, never met them before, and I see them shouting and stuff, and I'm like, hey, could you go to this other area? They might say, who the F are you, right? And so rapport is really, it's a lot of things. And then the last, or the second to last thing that we'll talk more about is recognizing and responding to risk behavior. Risk behavior is when someone is being unsafe, when they're potentially going to be violent to ourselves or property, or they're just being generally unpredictable. Maybe they're going to fight with someone else. And how do we respond to risk behavior? One thing that I'm stopping to note here is all of us carry our own potential traumas, right? And so it's difficult to assess risk behavior because I hear a lot of people say, I feel unsafe. Feeling unsafe does not necessarily mean you are unsafe, right? It may be someone is appearing dangerous. Does that warrant calling 911? Does that warrant responding as if we're in danger? You should err on the side of safety, but how do we assess, is this like, an echo of the past for me because I've experienced trauma, or because I'm not used to this kind of population, or is this actual danger? And so that's a challenge, but that's something we can talk about. How do we assess risk? And this is a handy graph that might be a little too many words and a little too detailed to be useful. So I want to explain this just as a concept. So on this graph, we see severity of harm on the y-axis and likelihood of behavior on the x-axis. So if we're thinking of how severe something might be, that's one thing, right? If we're also thinking about how likely it is to happen, that's another thing. So I briefly worked for a period of time in like a nursing home setting, and I worked with frail people who were bedbound. Some of them had Alzheimer's, and they might get aggressive when the sun goes down. And but how much could they hurt me, right? And there would be this elderly man who always got mad at me, and he was bedbound. And we have to think about everyone's dignity in their own rights, right? A lot of people I do this training with, they say, if I'm in danger, I'm going to do whatever I can to stay safe. And yeah, right? That's what we all should do. But what they usually mean is they're implying that they'll like get physical if they have to. And I remind them that actually is not the most rational way to stay safe. Sometimes if you get physical, not only was it unnecessary, but you make things worse sometimes. And so if this elderly person is agitated at me and they're threatening they're going to hit me, one thing I might note is if they've hit me, it's like, oop, it's a little tap, right? So am I justified in grabbing their wrist and pinning it down? No, because one, there's not much likelihood that they can hurt me, and two, I have easy options. You know what, I could just leave this room, right? This person can't follow me, and I'm upsetting them. Maybe it'd be better if I came back later. And so when we justify our decisions, we want to picture something like this graph, meaning we called the police, we, lost control of the situation. Well, we can do this forwards and backwards. Looking back on the situation, was that necessary? Was that something that we needed to do? And it depends. How likely was it that this person could cause danger or harm? And what was the likelihood of that? One of our programs that I support is called Co-occurring Enhanced, which means that we serve substance use and acute mental health. And so sometimes we get a variety of people with diagnoses, and some new staff haven't experienced what a schizophrenic person looks like when they're self-dialoguing and pacing. And I knew a client for years, but she came when the overnight staff was new, and I happened to check my email when I don't normally check it, and I saw that the overnight staff was freaking out. She's like, I'm scared for my life, this person is pacing, they're talking to themselves, and I'm scared about what they're going to do next. Is that real danger or psychological danger? She was scared because she wasn't familiar with this person, she wasn't familiar with their behavior. I've known them for years, they pace and they talk to themselves, and that's their baseline. So they're appearing at baseline, there's nothing to be concerned about. Just let them do what they're going to do. But they were reacting like, I need to call the police. And so, I don't like to check my email when I'm not working, but I felt impelled to prevent that from happening. And I called the program and said, this is this person's baseline, please just let them do that. And so we need to get skills in assessing, is this an emergency or is this not? I'm still going to encourage you at the end of this training to err on the side of caution, and if you don't know, take care of yourself, call the police, and get yourself distanced from a dangerous situation, but we can get better at trying to assess those things. Responding to risk, so again, summary, responding to anxiety is support. Responding to defensiveness is with being directive. When we're responding to risk or danger, when there's harm to self or others that's imminent and likely, the individual is not responding to our redirection, then our response in this setting is actually simple. Take care of your own safety and the safety of others. If two people are fighting, for instance, and they're not listening to you, try and focus on one of them. Redirect one of them. If you can't redirect two people, redirect everyone else, right? So this is kind of like control what you can, right? Clear the space, clear objects that might be used that are dangerous, and get yourself away from the situation. Property is not more important than people. So do not protect items, right? If they're going to break my computer, they can do that, right? If they're going to break this nice projector, they can do that. We're just going to stay safe. We're going to be people who are going to leave this situation alive and intact. So in a risk situation, the only thing that matters is the safety of living beings. Leave if you're able, and this would be when you might call for outside assistance like 911. And the response for tension reduction. That's the decrease in physical and emotional energy. This is always the goal, whether we are dealing with an individual who's anxious, defensive, or engaging in risk behavior. We want the next stage to be tension reduction. We want to respond to tension reduction with establishing or strengthening our relationship, because today's post-crisis is tomorrow's pre-crisis. So that means, someone was escalated, it was looking like a iffy situation, could go either way, right? But they calmed down, we're not done. This could happen again, right? And now we know, so we can prevent it, or we can minimize it. So if someone's tension is reducing, let's take advantage of that situation. Let's have a chat with them. Earlier, you were getting escalated with your peer. What was happening there? Could you do something different? I noticed you weren't responding to me when I was asking you to leave this space. What would help you if you were like that next time you were here, right? And so exploring those things when the iron is cold, right? They're no longer escalated, so there's more ability to respond to them. I like this image of a diamond. This is like a shield, right? And this is what defensive behavior can look like. So I mentioned that directive is the response to someone being defensive. These are all the different ways someone can appear defensive. They could refuse. Refusal could just be no, right? Could you leave this space? No, right? That's a refusal. Or it could be passive, right? They just don't respond. Maybe they're asleep or they're pretending to be asleep. Like, like we all did when we were kids, right? Like, they're just hanging out in a chair, and you're like, okay, it's closing time, and they're just gonna, like, kind of pretend that they didn't hear you, right? So that's refusal. Questioning, right? Like, why do I need to leave, right? That's questioning. Intimidation. Intimidation is what it sounds like, being either verbally or physically intimidating, threatening. And release can look like a lot of things. Release is the peak of escalation. So, I could get really pissed off, and the peak of my escalation is I kick the podium, and then from there I start to calm down. Everyone's release could look different. Maybe someone's release is more dangerous than someone else's. Maybe, maybe I have a bad phone call, I get off the phone call, and I'm like, oh! And that's my release. But some people's release is more concerning than others, right? But here's the secret ingredient of de-escalation. Most people calm down from their release without an intervention, right? If I get mad and I kick the podium and that's my release, I'm probably going to come down and show tension reduction without anyone needing to de-escalate me. The problem is that that happens in isolation. It gets more complicated when other people are involved. So actually the most difficult situation is two peers who are shouting at each other, getting into conflict. And their two escalation curves interact with each other. And one thing that is difficult for people to develop as a skill is two people are arguing, two people are escalating, and we have to put away their words, kind of watch the situation on mute, and look at their body language. And a lot of times if two people are going to fight, but they're not fighting, usually part of them is trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Most people who want to fight don't dance around, they just get into a fight, right? But what happens for a lot of people when they're fighting is this concept of saving face, right? So what saving face looks like is I'm escalated, I'm getting into an argument with someone, we're like maybe chest to chest, we're shouting at people, we're gonna fight, and in the back of my head I'm like, oh, this could be real, I gotta get out of this situation, right? No one de-escalates from 60 to 0. They go 60 to 55, right? So if I'm de-escalating, it's gonna actually look still escalated, right? So I'm backing away, I'm trying to sort out how to get out of this situation in a way that's not embarrassing. So I back away from the person, and then I'm starting to relax and turn away, and maybe I need to get one jab in verbally. And so as I'm getting away, I'm like, I don't want to fight you anyway because you're so effing ugly, right? And then I'm turning away and I'm walking, and if you watch this interaction on mute, you might be like, yes, right? They're coming. I see the tension reduction. Their muscles are relaxing and they're starting to turn away. But the interaction's not happening on mute, and the other person needs to save face too. So the other person says, what did you just say to me, right? And now they're ramping up again, right? So if there's ever a difference that we exhibit that's different from the people that we're serving, I want it to be this, which is watch interactions on mute. And if someone says that to you, for instance, right? Someone's in your face and they're being threatening or intimidating, and then they start to turn away and they get that one last word in, pay attention to their body language and know, is this de-escalation? If this is de-escalation, then your thought should be, yes, this is over, right? They had their release and now they're coming down, right? So even though they said something very rude to you, we can follow up and strike when the iron is cold. We could talk to them later and say, hey, I want to talk to you about what you said to me an hour ago. That was kind of disrespectful, right? But in the moment, it's like we want to cash in on that tension reduction. They are calming down. I am happy with this, right? So they say to you something very rude, but you're watching it on mute, so blur it out in your mind. They say to you, I don't want to fight with you anyway because you're just an effing idiot and you don't know what you're doing and whatever. But you're looking at their body and they're calming down and you're like, okay, good. This person is finishing up with what's going on with them, right? And I've seen lots of staff and volunteers do this in a variety of settings, someone is in your face shouting something and we respond like maybe a peer of theirs might, and we might say, what did you just say to me? And we bring it back. The situation is going to continue and it may even escalate, right? So one important skill is identifying that de-escalation does not look like de-escalation right away. Sometimes it looks like someone is still escalated, right? We want to notice by looking at someone's body language that they've turned a corner and things are going to get better. When we notice it happen with two people who are getting into a fight, we want to witness it also on mute a little bit and see, oh, this person is calming down. Maybe they'll respond to me a little better than the other person. And so we might say to them, hey, Henry, could you not respond to what this person says next and just listen to me? I need you to back away from that person, please. Come over here, right? And this other person is not listening to me, so I'm just going to focus on Henry. Henry, come here, please. I need to talk to you, right? So I'm being directive, I'm breaking the fight up, and I'm focusing on the one person I have a better relationship with and who's de-escalating. So after there's tension reduction, we want to focus on therapeutic rapport, building our relationship. The individual served should understand any expectations. So maybe something didn't go very well, right? They weren't listening to us, they weren't leaving. But if we strike when the iron's cold, the situation's over, we can have a nice conversation about it. We can say, hey, earlier or yesterday, I spoke to you about leaving the warming center and you weren't listening. And you didn't follow my directions. That was concerning to me. What's going on there? So this is our new vocabulary going forward, these definitions, and right after this we have a break. So, if someone is anxious, we're going to offer them support. If someone is defensive, we're going to be directive, and we'll talk a little more about those skills. If someone is showing risk behavior, that's when we might consider leaving the room or calling 911, our safety precautions. And if someone is showing tension reduction, we want to cash in and build our therapeutic rapport. Let's talk now, shift to defensiveness, and what I said earlier about those skills around being directive, and let's figure out what it means to be directive. First thing I want to say, use short, simple phrases that a person can follow. So, being directive, you don't want to give a long preamble or a long postamble and say, I need you to leave this space because at 3 after we're doing this, and you already know this expectation, I shouldn't be telling you this, you need to leave. So that's too many words, right? And I added too much. It's just like, the expectation is you need to leave this part of the room, we need you in this part of the room, right? I'm being short and to the point, trying not to be rude with my redirection, but I want it to be clear. And then they might say more things, and I might have more response, but relatively, I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record, right? Biggest mistake I see a lot of staff and counselors make in my programs is they get caught up in a back and forth that's unnecessary. Someone is like saying, this isn't fair, you don't treat other people this way, and instead of repeating the simple expectation, they're like, actually, this is fair, and here's why, and this and this and this. That is unnecessary. You're complicating the situation. Just be a broken record, right? If someone's being defensive, we can have a conversation later. But for now, I need them to focus on an expectation. So I'm not going to escalate myself, I'm not going to stress out. I'm just like, okay, that may be, I'm happy to talk about that. The expectation is you leave this area and you're in this area. Or you leave, whatever the expectation is, that's what I'm going to repeat. I'm going to be clear. So how do you know it's a risky situation? Well, someone is showing you that possibility by being intimidating, being threatening, and they're not responding to you or other volunteers. You can't redirect them. So redirect other people. If they're still escalated and they're not calming down because the room has been cleared, maybe they're getting even more escalated, that shouldn't be happening. So if it is happening, you've lost control, go ahead and play it safe and call 911 and exit if necessary, right? If they start agitating, throwing chairs, things like that, that's your body language nonverbal cue, it's time to leave. So, instant rapport, your best bet is, hi, my name is Devin, how are you? What's going on for you? And that is a challenge if someone you're meeting is already escalated, because you don't have the opportunity to build rapport in general. But it's not off the table. You can still build a rapport if you're just meeting someone for the first time who's escalated. And when I worked in the psych hospital a decade ago and I was running to codes and stuff, one cheat that I used is I carried an air of respect and authority. So I would walk into a situation with someone really escalated. I was a direct care staff, it was an entry-level position, but they see me running as a new person to the situation, so I would kind of like carry an air that I'm the person who can kind of help them in this moment. And I'd be like, what's going on? How can I help? You know? And they're kind of putting on me, oh, this is manager. I want to talk to the person in charge, right? And now I'm not lying to anyone, I didn't say I'm in charge, but I am a little directive, which reinforces that idea that I'm a person of authority. So I'm like, why don't we talk in this office space, right? Let's get out of the common area where everyone can listen. I want to hear what you have to say. So even though I was an entry-level position, I was direct care staff, I entered the situation with certain confidence and authority, and I let them know, like, I'm not a part of this existing conflict. I'm here to listen to you. Maybe I'm a person who can help you, right? So that was one way I cut through to build that instant rapport. One, I was being directive, and I was also being directive in a way where it's like I'm communicating non-verbally. I'm someone who can help you right now, right? So we often we feel in over our heads sometimes, and so it's difficult to have confidence that I can help someone, but we can fake it till we make it, right? And so I might walk into a situation where someone is, not responsive. They're not being, they're not their best selves. They're highly escalated. They're being defensive. And when someone's being defensive, one reason that I'm telling you to be directive is because they're feeling a lot of chaos, and someone's coming in to bring some control, right? And so when someone is showing distress behaviors, they're communicating distress, and part of them is saying, tell me what the rules are. Tell me what's going to settle things. I'm feeling unsettled, right? So I am happy to assist with that. So I come to them confidently, and I communicate non-verbally and verbally. I'm that person. Here's the expectations. Here's what we need to do. Important. I am not mad. I am not upset with them for their behavior. I am just a person bringing order to disorder. So I'm coming to them and I'm saying, here's the expectation. How can we get back to that? Okay, you have your response? Here's the expectation. Here's what we need to do, okay? And then, as we're chatting, I'm watching their body, they're reducing tension, and then I'm going for that therapeutic rapport. So I'm building that relationship. Culture is a wide variable too. There are some cultures where the exact opposite thing happens with the same behavior, right? And one example is eye contact, right? In some cultures, eye contact is a sign of respect, and in other cultures, it's a sign of disrespect. And so it's hard to give you blanket instructions of how we greet people, because different people respond to things different ways. So to some people, it may be that a firm handshake really cuts through that shame, and it says to you, I see you as a person, and I'm meeting you there, right? And so a handshake is a great way to make that connection. There may be other people where that immediate touch is scary, because it's like they've been violated, their physical space has been violated, and now a stranger wants to touch them immediately. And how do we navigate that? One great way to navigate it is to ask the question when you meet someone, right? Like, are you someone who likes a handshake? I'm happy to meet you, right? So I'm getting across the point that I want to connect with you and I see you as a person, but I do want to do a quick check that it's okay to do that, right? And so I like Sue's suggestion. I just want to add that caveat, and the same applies for things like eye contact. We do have to kind of play things by ear a little, right? We don't know what people walk in with as their background, so I can't give everyone a blanket list of like, always do this or don't always do that. We just have to get to know people. But one thing that we can always do is be supportive in general.